It wasn't the snow that scared them, not the ice or the wind. It was the silence, the kind that settles when the hum of life suddenly stops. Good evening and welcome back to Wisdom by the Fireside. Tonight's story comes from our events line. It's about a moment when the world's most powerful state, Texas, was brought to its knees by something as ancient as winter. But what happened during those frozen days in 2021 wasn't just about electricity. It was about faith, survival, failure, and unexpected mercy. When the power grid collapsed, some froze in silence, but others lit candles of compassion. The snow fell thick across Austin on the night of February 14th, 2021, Valentine's Day. The kind of night made for warmth, for love, for laughter behind closed doors. But the snow didn't care about sentiment. It blanketed highways, hardened trees into glass sculptures, and coiled like a predator around homes that weren't built to fight it. By midnight, the first blackouts hit. Across Travis County, families stirred from sleep to a shocking cold. The hum of HVAC systems died. Lights blinked out like the eyes of a machine shutting down. Phones lit up with confused texts. Is your power out too? No heat. What's going on? Nobody knew yet that this was not going to be a short disruption. In a one-story home just outside of Houston, 68-year-old Maria Jimenez wrapped herself in 4 layers of blankets. The power had cut hours earlier, and the temperature inside her house was dropping fast. Her pipes were already frozen. She hadn't seen this kind of cold since her childhood in northern Mexico. Her fingers trembled as she tried to light a candle. It flickered, casting shadows across the framed photos of her grandchildren on the mantel. She had no idea that the state's electric grid, ERCOT, was moments from collapse. Across the city in a suburban neighborhood of Katy, a young father named Isaac Lerman was trying to keep his 3-year-old son calm. They had a newborn too, just 4 weeks old. The nursery was freezing. He moved the bassinet into the bathroom, turned on the hot water in the tub to create steam, then wrapped towels under the door to trap what little warmth they had. "I don't care if we flood the bathroom," he whispered to his wife, Rachel. "We just need to keep her breathing." Outside, the snow kept falling. But what caused the lights to go out in the Lone Star State, where oil and independence flowed in equal measure? Texas had its own power grid, separate from the rest of the U.S. to avoid federal oversight. It was a badge of pride, a symbol of freedom. But it came at a price. When the storm hit, demand for heat soared, but power plants weren't built for sub-zero temperatures. Natural gas lines froze, wind turbines iced over, coal piles solidified, and there were no interstate connections to draw power from other states. The system failed catastrophically. The grid operators made a terrible choice. They had to cut power deliberately to prevent total blackout. They didn't warn people, they didn't explain, they just went dark. Back in Austin, 22-year-old Jordan Miller, a college senior, was huddled under a tarp with his roommates. They'd been without power for 2 days. They used their barbecue grill for warmth, burned textbooks they no longer needed, and melted snow in pots to flush the toilet. But it wasn't the cold that broke Jordan's heart. It was the knocking on their door. An elderly neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who lived 2 doors down, stood shivering, his hands blue, his lips cracked. "I haven't eaten in a day," he whispered. "Can I charge my phone? My daughter's trying to get to me from Dallas." Jordan had no heat, no electricity, no real food, but he opened the door anyway. In disaster, people either close their hands or open them. That week, thousands of Texans became strangers to one another, or brothers. At gas stations, lines stretched for blocks. Fights broke out over bread, water, batteries. But right beside them, churches opened their doors, even without power. Restaurants gave away spoiled food. Mechanics turned garages into shelters. Muslim, Jewish, and Christian groups joined forces to deliver blankets to the elderly. It wasn't just a storm, it was a revelation. But some didn't survive. By the end of the blackout, at least 246 people had died. Many from hypothermia, others from fires or carbon monoxide poisoning as they tried to stay warm. And not one public official lost their job that week. In fact, Ted Cruz boarded a flight to Cancun. and Texans were left in the dark. But what did God reveal in the silence of those nights? Why were some spared while others perished? And who became heroes without anyone noticing? The answers begin to emerge in the next part. Stay close to the fire. The second morning of the blackout broke not with sunrise, but with gray stillness. The kind of morning where birds were absent, where snow muffled the world like a secret. Maria Jimenez hadn't slept. She sat in a kitchen chair under 3 quilts, listening to her own breath and the tick of a clock that no longer kept time. She hadn't spoken to anyone in over 18 hours. Her cell phone was dead. Her stove was gas, but the ignition required electricity. She tried lighting it with a match and got it going, but she knew it wasn't safe. The smell of gas lingered too long. So she shut it off and waited. What else can the elderly do in moments like these but wait? Down in Galveston, Tremaine Davis, a 17-year-old high school senior, was walking the icy streets. He had a backpack full of blankets. His grandmother, who raised him after his mother died, had drilled into him the value of doing the right thing even if no one's looking. Tremaine had heat. His uncle owned a small liquor store with a backup generator, and they were sleeping in the back room. But the folks next door, an old couple who once gave him candy every Halloween, they were freezing. So Tremaine packed what he could, put on 2 coats, and went door to door. At each stop, he knocked, handed over a blanket, and moved on. Nobody told him to do it. Nobody gave him a medal. But as one woman whispered through chattering teeth, "You're an angel, baby." Back in Austin, Jordan Miller was rethinking everything. Mr. Henderson, the elderly neighbor he let in, had spent the night curled up in their cold living room. The grill outside kept them alive, but barely. That morning, Mr. Henderson admitted something that changed everything. My daughter, she didn't make it. Her car slid on I-35. They just told me this morning. There were no tears in his voice, just a quiet kind of collapse. Jordan felt helpless. What do you say to a man who's lost everything except the cold? He didn't say anything. He just sat beside him. And they stayed there, 2 men from different worlds, united by grief and frost. Sometimes silence is the only prayer we know how to offer. Meanwhile, in Dallas, a hospital lost power for 7 straight hours. Nurses used their own cell phones for light. Ventilators were hand-pumped manually. One patient, an elderly man in palliative care, died in the middle of the night. Not from disease, but from cold. His name was Franklin Parks, and he was 82. A Korean War veteran, a retired school principal, a father of 5. No media outlet mentioned him. No press conference held a moment of silence. But his daughter, who drove through 2 cities to reach the hospital too late, left a note on the waiting room wall. It read, "He always said the Lord would take him when the house got too quiet. The house just happened to be Texas." But where was leadership during all this? The governor held a press briefing. He blamed the wind turbines. Social media exploded with memes, misinformation, political rage. But the people in the dark didn't have Wi-Fi to read them. They were too busy boiling snow to flush their toilets. And as the days wore on, the line between tragedy and absurdity grew thinner. In upscale neighborhoods with natural gas fireplaces and emergency solar panels, residents sipped tea and read novels. 5 miles away, a family of 6 died in their garage, trying to heat the car for warmth. And still, the acts of compassion didn't stop. A mosque in Irving opened its doors to everyone. Muslim, Christian, atheist, didn't matter. They had power for one room, so they made that room a sanctuary. Volunteers passed out lentil soup and charging cables. Children laughed together under flickering lights. An elderly Jewish man named Harold Stein leaned against a wall and whispered to an imam nearby, "I never thought I'd feel safe in a mosque." The imam smiled. That's what a house of God is for. Meanwhile, Isaac and Rachel and Katie were on the edge. Their baby girl had developed a cough. The bathroom trick wasn't enough anymore. The temperature inside was now 36 degrees Fahrenheit. Isaac knew they needed help. But where could they go? All the warming shelters were full. Hotels were charging triple rates or had no power at all. And he couldn't risk the roads. He looked at his baby. And then quietly, he did something he hadn't done in years. He closed his eyes, and prayed, not eloquently, not formally, just a whisper. God, I don't even know if you hear me anymore. But if you do, please, send someone. He didn't know it yet, but God was already 3 steps ahead. Because just down the road, an elderly woman named Clara Johnson was watching her Ring camera footage. She'd seen the young family earlier in the week, walking in the snow. She felt something in her chest, a tug. She packed up her generator, a gallon of soup, and her Bible. And she walked into the storm. What drives a person to leave comfort and walk into someone else's darkness? When leadership fails, does the moral responsibility fall on the ordinary? And is it possible that in these moments, we are being quietly tested from above? You'll find out in the next part. Stay close to the fire. The snow was deeper than Clara Johnson expected. She was 74, with 2 artificial knees and a stubborn hip that ached in damp weather. But she didn't care. She had soup, she had fuel, she had faith, and somehow she knew the Lord was leading her feet. Just 2 blocks away, Isaac had just wrapped his baby in a warm towel pulled from the dryer. A neighbor with limited power had offered to run one quick load for them. The moment the towel cooled, the baby's cough returned. Rachel sat with her head in her hands. She hadn't slept in 30 hours. They had boiled all the snow in the yard. Their flashlight batteries were nearly dead. When the knock came, they didn't move at first. It came again. Isaac opened the door slowly, and there stood Clara, cheeks red, eyes fierce, holding a generator in one hand and a pot of soup in the other. "I think this belongs to you," she said. She set it all down, like it was the most normal thing in the world. No drama, no sermon, just quiet purpose. And when Isaac tried to hug her, she laughed. "I didn't come for that. I came because I prayed this morning, and the answer was walk." Then she added, "And the soup has extra garlic. That baby's gonna be just fine." The generator gave them just enough heat to stop the baby's cough, and enough light for Rachel to see her husband's tears for the first time in years. Across town, Jordan Miller was standing in line for water. The grocery store had set up an emergency supply table. The line wrapped around the block, no power, no music, just heavy breathing and the occasional coughing child. Then a strange thing happened. A man in line, just 5 feet ahead of Jordan, dropped a $50 bill from his coat. Jordan saw it, picked it up, and tapped the man on the shoulder. "Hey, this yours?" The man looked confused, then amazed. "I didn't even know I dropped that." He took it, thanked Jordan, and turned back. 10 minutes later, he came back with a bottle of water and a chocolate bar. "For you," he said. "You're the only one who saw me drop it and didn't keep it." They stood side by side in silence, and for a moment the cold didn't matter. Meanwhile, inside a tiny senior housing center in Waco, a woman named Mrs. Eunice Templeton, 88 years old, was writing her will by candlelight. "I always thought I'd pass in my sleep," she said aloud to no one. "But if it's tonight, I want the Lord to know I left my affairs in order." She scribbled names of grandchildren. Her cursive shook from the cold. Her arthritis made the pen feel like a crowbar. Then came the slam of a door. Loud voices. Laughter? The building manager had returned. With 2 firemen and 3 members of a local church, they had flashlights, sleeping bags, hot soup, and gospel music. One fireman knelt beside Eunice. "Ma'am," he said, "you ain't dying tonight." She smiled and handed him the half-written paper. "Good. Then let's burn this and start over." Back in the control room of ERCOT, the decisions were more mathematical than moral. Charts showed spikes in demand. Frozen equipment, gas lines that hadn't been winterized. Executives debated percentages, liabilities, futures markets. The grid had narrowly avoided full collapse, only because power was cut to millions without warning. No apology was issued, no televised compassion, just numbers. But while the powerful calculated, the powerless adapted. In one church basement in Lubbock, there were 57 people sleeping shoulder to shoulder. Among them were 2 undocumented families who had been afraid to enter the shelter at first. But when the pastor saw them outside shivering, he opened the door himself. "Your paperwork doesn't matter," he said. "You're children of God. Come in." And they did. Later that night, one of the undocumented mothers whispered to another, I think God hid us here, in the cold, but in the light. Meanwhile, in a wealthier district of San Antonio, a water pipe burst in a mansion owned by a state legislator. The entire upstairs flooded, the floors buckled, the antique furniture was ruined. In a moment of raw irony, the man who had once voted against statewide emergency infrastructure reform was rescued by a volunteer driving a rusted 2004 pickup truck. The volunteer didn't recognize him. He only said, "You good, sir?" and handed him a cup of soup. The man nodded, too ashamed to say anything else. Sometimes God allows nature to speak louder than men in suits. Sometimes the storm doesn't come to destroy, but to reveal. When comfort is taken from us, what is revealed beneath? Is the grid broken, or is something deeper misaligned? And when the lights go out, what kind of neighbor are we really? The answers keep unfolding. Stay close to the fire. By day 4, the novelty of snow had long vanished. Texas looked like a painting stripped of color. White fields, gray skies, blackened trees. Beauty, yes, but beauty with teeth. Grocery stores were barren, roads were barely passable. And most devastating of all, hope began to freeze too. In an apartment complex in Denton, Malik Turner, a disabled Army veteran, lay curled up beneath a mound of towels. His power had been off for 60 hours. His wheelchair battery had long died. The walls sweated with condensation. The air inside was sharper than the air outside. He couldn't get down the stairs. His phone was dead. And all he could do was whisper into the dark, "Lord, if you want me, come take me. But don't let it be slow." Just 6 floors down, Danielle Suarez, a 26-year-old nursing student, was checking on neighbors. She had no medical equipment, no first aid kit, but she had instincts and a heart that refused to sit still. She'd been raised to believe that when crisis comes, you go toward the pain, not away. When she heard that there was a disabled vet upstairs who hadn't come out in 2 days, she grabbed her boots. With another neighbor's help, she carried up hot water in thermoses and a warm blanket. They found Malik shivering, lips pale, pulse erratic. He looked up at her through blurry eyes and said, "Did God send you?" Danielle smiled, though her own fingers were numb. "No," she said. "He sent both of us." Meanwhile, in a farmhouse on the outskirts of Abilene, a family of 4 was huddled in their barn. Their home's pipes had burst, ceilings collapsed, and mold was already forming. So they moved into the barn with their goats. It smelled like hay and survival. The father, Raymond, had grown up poor. He never imagined he'd return to sleeping on hay bales with his wife and kids. But as they sat together under layers of quilts, feeding each other spoonfuls of canned beans, something unexpected happened. His teenage daughter, Emily, pulled out her phone. It was nearly dead, but she used the last 4% to play Amazing Grace. They all sang, shivering, laughing between verses, off-key and cracking. "I once was lost, but now I'm found." They didn't have heat, but in that barn, they had something even warmer. Across the state, the number of deaths quietly climbed. Some fell asleep and never woke up. Others lit fires that consumed their homes. A 7-year-old boy named Christian Pineda died in his bed beside his little brother. They'd built a snowman just the day before. His photo would go viral. A small boy in a red jacket, smiling at a world that would fail him within 48 hours. But his mother's voice would not go viral. She whispered through tears to a local reporter. "He was cold, but he never cried. He just held my hand." The spiritual reckoning spread with the storm. Churches, mosques, and temples began to ring bells again. Not for services, but for sanctuary. In Plano, Pastor Elias Harper broadcasted one final live stream before the internet cut out. Wrapped in his coat, lit by a flashlight, he said, "Brothers and sisters, maybe this is the moment we've been too distracted to hear. Not the news, not the grid, but the whisper of heaven. Look around you. Who have you fed? Who have you warmed?" The video cut halfway through, but not before 400,000 people saw it. Back in Galveston, Tremaine Davis, the teen who gave away blankets, was now out of supplies. But something odd had happened. People started leaving things at his doorstep. More blankets, water bottles, cans of soup. No names, no messages. Just anonymous acts of kindness. His uncle shook his head and laughed. "You created a blessing loop, boy. God sees movement and sends momentum. Tremaine didn't know how to respond, so he just kept giving. In that same city, an elderly man named Richard Goldman, an atheist for 65 years, stepped into a church for the first time in his life. He didn't come to pray. He came because his neighbor had died alone the night before, and Richard couldn't bear to be next. But when he entered, expecting stares, expecting pity, he found a group of strangers who simply handed him a cup of cocoa and a blanket. One volunteer patted the seat beside her and said, "We're all cold, but here we warm up together." Richard sat, and as the cold melted from his limbs, something unexpected stirred in his heart. Not conversion, but curiosity, and that too is a beginning. Not every miracle is loud. Not every mercy is glowing. Sometimes it's a cup of cocoa handed by someone who doesn't ask your name. Why does suffering come in waves and mercy in whispers? What if the cold didn't come to destroy, but to test what remains unshaken? And how many answer to divine call without even realizing it? There's more to uncover. Stay close to the fire. Some storms arrive with warnings, radar alerts, crawling banners on the news, sirens. But not this one. This storm came as a question. When everything you depend on is stripped away, what's left of you? By the fifth day, even the luckiest Texans were running out of options. Gasoline became gold. Water turned brown. City officials handed out boil notices. But the irony bit cruelly. There was no power to boil with. In a halfway house in South Dallas, 8 recovering addicts sat around a kitchen table in the dark. They had no food, no heaters, only coffee made from melted ice and a handful of leftover saltines. One of them, Terry, was 3 months clean. He looked around at his roommates, guys with scars, pasts, tattoos of pain, and said, "If we make it through this without using, we're stronger than any program can teach." The others laughed. Dark humor. Desperate. Then one of them pulled out a small Bible, pages wrinkled, corners bent. He read aloud, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." And for the first time since they arrived at that house, no one interrupted. At the same hour, in a private home in Highland Park, an affluent suburb of Dallas, a tech CEO named Brandon Wexler was pacing in his marble kitchen. He had power and heat. A private generator kept everything running. But his phone buzzed with news of colleagues stuck without water and photos of frozen toilets in East Austin. He stared at the screen for a long while, and then, on instinct, he logged into his Venmo account. Within an hour, he had transferred over $100,000 in anonymous payments to people requesting emergency help online. Gas money, food, hotel rooms, diapers. He used a burner account, no name attached. He didn't want thanks, just action. He told his wife, "I don't know what's happening. I just feel like this isn't a test of infrastructure. It's a test of soul." She nodded. "Then pass it," she whispered. That same night, Maria Jimenez, the elderly woman who'd lit her stove with a match, was barely conscious. The gas had run too long. Her neighbors, finally checking in after 2 days of silence, found her collapsed on the kitchen floor. Eyes open, breathing shallow. They wrapped her in warm towels, loaded her into a car, and sped, carefully, through snow-covered roads to the nearest clinic with power. The nurse said had they waited 1 more hour, she wouldn't have made it. Maria woke up the next morning with an oxygen tube, a warm blanket, and a photo taped to her wall, one taken by her granddaughter years ago. It showed her standing in front of a garden, smiling. She blinked and whispered, "You're not done with me yet, are you, God?" Elsewhere in San Marcos, a group of college students turned their dorm into a soup kitchen. No power, no refrigeration. So they lit candles, boiled snow on propane stoves, and cooked everything in their mini fridge. They posted a sign on the front door, "Free hot food, no questions. Come in." Dozens came. One woman who hadn't eaten in 2 days broke down crying as she sipped the lukewarm broth. "I never thought a frat house would be holy ground," she said. They handed her a bowl of rice and said, "Well, miracles start somewhere." And still, officials argued. News clips from state leaders aired on battery-powered radios, finger-pointing, blame games. "We weren't expecting temperatures this low," one spokesman said. "We were prepared for cold, just not this cold." But no one could answer the question whispered in living rooms across Texas. Why weren't we ready if they knew this could happen? The answer wasn't meteorological. It was spiritual. This storm was not just an act of weather. It was an act of revelation. It exposed infrastructure flaws, yes, but it also exposed hearts, intentions, priorities, faith. In Houston, Isaac, Rachel, and baby Lily sat quietly in the living room. Clara Johnson's generator hummed beside them. The baby was breathing better, her cheeks pink again. They didn't talk much. Until Clara suddenly asked, "What do you think this whole mess means?" Rachel looked up, dazed. Like, why it happened? Why we're in it together? Isaac cleared his throat. To remember each other, he said slowly, before the world forgot. Clara smiled. Maybe God needed to shut everything down to get our attention. Sometimes blessings come wrapped in frost. Sometimes survival is the sermon. And sometimes strangers are the answer to prayers you forgot you whispered. What if suffering doesn't always come to punish, but to purify? What are we meant to learn from 5 days of darkness in a land of light? And what parts of us never would have awakened without the storm? More lives will emerge from the frost. Stay close to the fire. By the 6th day, a strange transformation had taken hold. The world outside was still coated in ice. But inside many homes, something had thawed. In El Paso, a young woman named Naima Abdallah, originally from Sudan, was volunteering at a shelter hosted by a local synagogue. She was Muslim. She'd never been inside a synagogue before. But when the rabbi opened the doors to the community, no conditions, no questions, Naima showed up with her mother's lentil stew recipe and a box of gloves. People don't care what you are when they're cold, she told a reporter. They just want to know if you'll share your fire. That night, she and the rabbi sat on milk crates, sipping broth together. They didn't talk politics. They just swapped stories about their mothers. Meanwhile, in College Station, Bradley and Sonia Franklin, an older couple in their 60s, lit their fireplace for the first time in years. They hadn't spoken deeply in weeks before the blackout. Too many distractions, TV, work, life. Now, bundled together in silence, with only the fire cracking, they found themselves sharing childhood memories, laughing, weeping, confessing things that had been buried for decades. Bradley told her about the time he almost left her 20 years ago. Sonia told him about the cancer scare she kept to herself. Neither shouted, neither left, because the power wasn't just out in their house, it had been out in their marriage too. And somehow, the blackout brought the light back. Back in Denton, Malik Turner, rescued from hypothermia by Danielle, was awake and warm for the first time in days. Danielle and her roommate had moved him into their apartment. They gave him their only heater. He tried to protest. "I'm just some guy," he muttered. Danielle looked at him and said, "You're not just anything. You served. You fought. You belong. Don't let this storm lie to you." He hadn't heard words like that since his discharge. When she left the room, he bowed his head, not from pain, but reverence, and said a prayer he hadn't said in over 30 years. Meanwhile, in San Antonio, a city worker named Ruben Castillo had taken it upon himself to knock on every door in a 12-block radius. His daughter had died 2 years earlier from a rare illness. Since then, Ruben had walked with a kind of numbness. But something about this storm reignited his hands. He didn't ask permission, didn't seek orders. He just grabbed a clipboard, flashlight, and knocked. "Anyone need water? Meds? Warmth?" An elderly woman answered in tears. "I've been waiting for my son," she whispered. Ruben smiled. "Well, I'm not your son, but I'm here. Sometimes God doesn't send thunder. Sometimes he just sends someone who knocks." That evening, a group of teenagers in Fort Worth loaded up their parents' pickup trucks with supplies from their own pantries. Bread, water, blankets, soup. They drove street to street, honking, calling out over a loudspeaker, "We've got warmth and food. Come out! Come out!" At first, no one came. Then, one by one, people appeared in doorways, nervous, curious. The kids handed out supplies through truck windows like mobile angels. One of them, a girl named Michaela, posted a photo on Instagram. a line of bundled strangers receiving soup in the snow. She captioned it, "No politicians helped us this week, but my generation showed up." It went viral, not because it was political, but because it was true. Back in Houston, Clara Johnson sat with baby Lily in her lap, while Rachel dozed on the couch. Isaac walked in, a hot towel in hand. "Where'd you learn how to take care of a baby like that?" he asked Clara. She chuckled. "I raised 7, lost 2, buried a husband, buried a son. But the Lord, He never buried my spirit." Isaac paused, deeply moved. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. Why'd you come that night? To us. You didn't even know our names." Clara looked at him, not blinking. "Because I remembered what it felt like to pray and wonder if anyone was listening. And I decided I'd be the answer to somebody's prayer. For once." That night, the lights came back on across half the state. Heaters roared, phones buzzed, screens lit up. But in many homes, the return of power brought something else, a quiet ache. An odd part of them missed the darkness. Because in the darkness, they had seen each other. Isn't it strange how we become family in the silence? How disaster strips away noise and leaves only truth? And how, when the fire finally goes out, we still remember its warmth? Did we witness a failure of power or a revelation of character? Are we still the same people we were before the lights went out? And what if the storm didn't expose weakness, but revealed hidden strength? More final awakenings are yet to come. Stay close to the fire. The warmth returned unevenly. Some neighborhoods glowed again with light. Heaters clattered to life. Coffee brewed. Toasters clicked. And yet, other places stayed shrouded in dark and cold. And that was perhaps the most bitter lesson of all. Relief had a zip code. In East Austin, Jordan Miller turned on his faucet, only to watch brown water sputter out. They had power now, sure, but the pipes were damaged, and the water treatment facility had lost pressure days ago. He filled a pot and held it up to the light. Mud, a faint smell of sewage. Jordan looked over at Mr. Henderson, his elderly neighbor still wrapped in blankets. "We're going to have to boil this." Then he remembered. Their last pan had burned through days ago. In a nearby apartment, Annika Shah, a third-year medical student, posted a message on her community Facebook page. "If your water's unsafe, come by 6B. I've got propane and clean pots." She expected 2 or 3 visitors. By nightfall, she had helped 41 people boil water in her tiny kitchen. Every 5 minutes, a new knock. Every time she greeted them with, "Welcome in. I've got heat for you too." By the end of the night, she was exhausted. But when someone left behind a note that read, "You saved my father's insulin from spoiling. You saved his life," she cried. Quietly, proudly, alone. Across the state, the counting began. Not of miracles, of losses. The official death toll ticked upward. Names appeared in obituaries. Tiny footnotes for souls lost not to war, but to weather. And neglect. A mother and daughter in Houston killed by carbon monoxide. A homeless man in Amarillo, frozen beside a dumpster. A newborn in San Angelo, gone from respiratory failure after the heater failed. A 60-year-old man found frozen in his recliner, TV remote still in his hand. The numbers didn't match the scale. Many victims were never officially counted. No autopsy, no resources. Just cold death and silence. And still, the stories of grace multiplied. In Midland, a stranger knocked on every door in his trailer park. Left behind bundles of firewood and a note that simply read, "You matter." No name, no trace. In Corpus Christi, a young woman named Erica built a makeshift shelter for stray dogs with her brother. They used scrap wood, leftover blankets, and a heat lamp tied to a car battery. The next day, they found 7 dogs curled together, alive and safe. Her brother looked at her and said, "You saved more souls this week than most politicians do in a year." She laughed through her tears. And in the quietest part of San Angelo, a man named Dean Walsh, who had once been a preacher, but lost his faith after his son died, found himself walking into a darkened chapel. The doors were open, no one else inside, but the candle by the altar still flickered. He sat in the last pew, folded his hands, and then whispered, "I don't know if you're there, but if you are, I've seen you this week. Isn't it strange how the cold breaks down walls? How strangers become caretakers? How, when we are stripped of everything, the soul dares to speak again? In Katy, Clara Johnson stood in the middle of Isaac and Rachel's living room. The lights were back, the heater buzzed. Baby Lily giggled in a onesie that finally smelled like detergent again. Isaac held Clara's hand. I don't think we can ever thank you enough, he said. Clara shrugged. Don't, she said. Just remember what you learned here, and teach it forward. Rachel asked, What do you mean? Clara looked at both of them, then at the baby. This storm will pass, but another will come, not snow. Maybe something harder. Make sure when the next darkness falls, your fire's already lit. That night, Clara walked back to her own house, alone, quiet. She turned on her radio. A soft gospel song played. She poured a glass of tea, sat in her rocker, and whispered, Thank you for letting me be useful again. You see, not every angel has wings. Some just walk with soup and a generator and disappear when the light comes back on. Why do some storms break us and others break us open? Is survival enough? Or are we meant to be transformed? And when God turns off the lights, is he sometimes trying to help us see? We're near the final reflection. Stay close to the fire. By the seventh day, the snow began to melt, but the silence remained. It wasn't the silence of power outages anymore. It was the aftermath silence, the kind that settles in after something sacred has passed through, leaving both wreckage and wisdom behind. State officials began holding briefings again. They used words like resilience and unprecedented. They talked about reform, responsibility, reviews. But in small-town churches, apartment stairwells, front porches, the people weren't talking about press conferences. They were talking about each other. In Galveston, Tremaine Davis finally ran out of blankets. He sat on his porch sipping tea made with boiled rainwater. A local journalist came to interview him. You're kind of famous now, she smiled. What made you do it? He shrugged. Seemed like what Jesus would do. Then he paused. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the real question is, why didn't everybody? The journalist looked at him quietly. That sentence made the front page the next morning. Across Texas, the spiritual leaders stood up, not to cast blame, but to call hearts. In Amarillo, Imam Salim stood in front of a packed mosque and said, God did not send the cold, but he watched how we reacted. He saw who shared, who turned away, and who turned toward. In a Baptist church in Tyler, Pastor Janice Carr looked out at her congregation. Half had come to service in borrowed coats. Some of you, she said, prayed harder this week than you have in 10 years. Some of you opened doors you never thought you'd open. So don't ask, why did God let this happen? Ask instead, what did I let God teach me? Meanwhile, the lawsuits began. Families of the dead demanded answers. Power companies issued formal denials. Insurance agencies cited acts of God. But those who had witnessed real acts of God weren't in courtrooms. They were in kitchens, still boiling water for neighbors. In churches, still opening their doors. In hearts, still echoing with questions that couldn't be answered by a judge. In Denton, Danielle Suarez visited Malik one last time. He was strong enough now to sit in his wheelchair, hands gloved, smile wide. I don't think I would have made it without you, he said. Danielle smiled. I don't think I would have made it without you either. They didn't say goodbye, they just nodded, like soldiers who'd survived the same war. In Houston, Isaac and Rachel stood on their porch with baby Lily. The air was warmer, the grass peeking through slush. They watched Clara Johnson walking up her own steps next door. She changed our life, Rachel whispered. Isaac nodded. No, he said. God did. She was just the delivery truck. That evening, Rachel posted something to Facebook. It was just a photo, Clara holding baby Lily by candlelight. The caption read, When the government failed us, our neighbor saved us, but it was God who sent her. The post was shared over 100,000 times in 2 days. Because it wasn't about outrage, it was about remembrance. In Austin, Jordan Miller returned to school. Mr. Henderson eventually moved in with his daughter in Dallas. Before he left Jordan a note. When your kids ask you what you did during the blackout, tell them you gave a stranger shelter. That's enough to be proud of. Jordan taped it to his mirror. He reads it every morning. And somewhere in Texas, no one knows where, a man who survived the storm alone, who never called for help and never left his house, finally stepped outside. He looked up at the sky. The sun was warm, the snow gone. The birds had returned, and he said aloud, "I was angry at you, God, but you still stayed." Sometimes the lights go out, so we can see the truth inside. Sometimes the fire dies, so we can light it for someone else. And sometimes a week of winter teaches what a decade of comfort never could. What will we do now that the storm has passed? Will we forget the hands that fed us, the strangers who saved us, the prayers that lit the cold? Or will we remember forever that when the world failed, faith stepped forward? One last reflection remains. Stay close to the fire. The snow had melted, the heaters were humming, the news cycle moved on, and the rest of the world stopped asking about Texas. But inside tens of thousands of homes, something had shifted forever. In small notebooks and late-night conversations, survivors recorded what they saw. Not just the deaths, but the deliverance. They remembered the knock on the door, the pot of soup, the borrowed blanket, the stranger's smile, the prayer whispered in the freezing dark. They remembered that compassion was the only light left, and it was enough. In schools, children drew pictures of their homes in candlelight. In nursing homes, elders told stories of neighborly grace. In mosques, churches, and shelters, volunteers who'd once been strangers hugged like family. The state held hearings, experts testified. Plans were drafted, budgets allocated. But no policy could capture the deeper truth. What froze wasn't just infrastructure. What thawed wasn't just snow. The blackout had carved a line through the soul of Texas. On one side, comfort, routine, pride. On the other, loss, mercy, awakening. And some would never cross back. Clara Johnson passed away 9 months later. Heart failure. Her obituary was short. But Isaac and Rachel posted something different on the baby's first birthday. A photo of Lily smiling beside a framed picture of Clara. The caption read, "She didn't have to knock, but she did. She didn't have to care, but she did. And we didn't have to believe again. But because of her, we did." Jordan Miller graduated the following spring. His final thesis wasn't about architecture, as planned. It was titled, "Designing for Disaster, Building Homes That Don't Forget the Cold." His professor asked why the change. Jordan replied, "Because I met someone who froze in my living room, and I never want to design a house that forgets what silence sounds like." Danielle Suarez went on to become a trauma nurse. Malik Turner became her first reference. He also joined her church. They now run a small nonprofit called Room Temperature, dedicated to installing emergency heating units in low-income housing. Their slogan, "Never again means now." Tremaine Davis got a scholarship he never applied for, an anonymous donor. He's studying theology. He says it's not because he wants to preach. "I just want to know the God who walked with me in that storm." Because he showed up. In every knock, every blanket, every stranger, he showed up. And what about the rest of Texas? Some forgot, some remembered. And some became the kind of people who, next time, won't wait for the grid to fail before sharing their fire. Because the truth is, the lights may go out again. Another storm will come, another test will rise. But this time, maybe someone will already be knocking. Maybe a neighbor will remember. Maybe you'll be the answer to a prayer someone hasn't said yet. This wasn't just a week of weather. It was a week of reckoning. A week that whispered, when the world fails, faith must rise. When the cold closes in, mercy must step out. And when the darkness deepens, be the fire. Final reflection. So ask yourself, if the lights went out tomorrow, would anyone remember your warmth? Did the storm make you colder, or did it awaken something holy in you? And when the world forgets, will you be one who remembers? Because storms will pass, but the souls shaped by them stay lit forever. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. We pray tonight's story reminded you of something deeper than comfort, something eternal. That compassion is God's light in human form. If the story touched your heart, share it to the ones you love. And if you would like to listen to more like it, you know where to find us.